What's going on? This is Aaron Price, the CEO of Tech United. We are 1 week away from the Propelify Innovation Festival. We have a ridiculous lineup on stage this year, including Jaime Rogozinski, the founder of Wall Street Bets, and he's joining me today to give a slight preview of what we might discuss next week. Jaime, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
We do a lot of high-fiving we used to in in-person events. And so now I do the virtual high five. So if you're down for it, you can high five the camera with me on the count of three. 1, 2, 3, boom. It's good to see you. Tell people I'm in Hoboken, New Jersey. From where are you joining us?
I'm currently in Mexico City. I've been living here for like 7 years or so, going on 8.
That's awesome. With your family, right?
Yep, that's right. I have a wife and a set of twin 3-year-old boys.
I'm sure that's a very calm environment all the time. Why Mexico City? Why the move?
I came down here for an opportunity and I decided to just stay here because it's really a wonderful city and a wonderful country and the people are great. And just the whole, I don't know, it's a really, really great place. And, I stopped making really long-term plans a while ago. So when I was in college, I'm like, by the time I'm 25, I'm going to live in this place and be a gazillionaire, entrepreneur, whatever. And then all that stuff fell apart. But good things happened anyways. I ended up living elsewhere and, I made money, then I lost money, whatever. I had failures and successes. And then that's when I realized I just need to embrace the ride, enjoy it. So I'm here until I'm no longer here.
Wow. What's the biggest misconception about living in Mexico?
I don't know. I mean, I guess there is this feel, at least portrayal of Mexico being like a huge narco state or whatever. While this is where the cartels reside. Like I have zero exposure to any of that, either cartels or violence. Like they're very segmented and they live in very specific cities and they really don't even try to mess with people. They have a business and they're trying to run it professionally and they try to just fight each other. So I've never had an issue with or been exposed to or been aware of anything related to drugs here.
Yeah, good. Well, I appreciate you joining us. You and anyone for anywhere in the world chiming in. That's one of we are this event, Propelify, Jaime, is produced by an organization called Tech United New Jersey. We're focused on bringing excellence here, but my hope is that it's the byproduct of bringing great people and great organizations to the area. New Jersey benefits and sort of not the other way around. So how did Wall Street Bets, for those who are unaware, how did it come to be?
So I started Wall Street Bets in 2012. At the time, I'm single. I have a good job that's leaving me a good disposable income, looking for and I have my responsible retirement accounts or whatever. And I'm looking for ways to take my extra money and put it to work, right? And not more aggressive, higher risk, higher return type of approach. And I go online, I look for different communities and forums or whatever, and there wasn't anything quite like what I was looking for. So then I just decided to create it. And I made the subreddit, a bunch of social accounts. I created this in several places. And sure enough, there's a lot of people with that same kind of hunger or thirst for discussing finance in a different sort of way.
Yeah. Did you see it as a business or was this a hobby to start?
No, it was a hobby. Like it was a hobby. It never, it doesn't pay anything or, the biggest presence of Wall Street Bets was or is on Reddit, right? There's a lot of other places now that are hundreds of thousands of people with that same name that I'm involved with. And the idea was always, let's just crowdsource ideas, crowdsource creativity, crowdsource edge. There became a moment where I decided I wrote a book in 2019. And it was basically a way for me to just share my ideas regarding the trends of what's happening with this demographic in the market. And then I decided to create a competitive day trading league where people can go and trade like in a live stadium in front of people, like an esports type event. Unfortunately, coronavirus kind of killed that dream, but now it's been resurrected. But as a business, Wall Street Bets, where people come in and talk about stocks and ideas, it was never intended, and nor do I intend on ever turning that into a business. There's a lot of other side projects that I'm involved with that can make money, but the core and the strength of Wall Street Bets is just people in the community.
So it seems like there's a real principled view behind Wall Street Bets and empowering people to towards financial decision making. I'm assuming towards some financial freedom. I'd love to hear a little bit about your worldview on wealth creation and how you think society enables certain people to or not to drive their own wealth, and how Wall Street Bets plays a role in that.
So, Wall Street Bets is, when I think about Wall Street Bets on these kind of large scale philosophical terms, I think less in terms of how this affects me or you, individual, how this affects the system and the world as a whole, right? Like a real macro. And when I started Wall Street Bets, like, although my incentives or my wanting to create it was what I just told you, I was motivated as well. As I've started reading about the stock market, I learned about these things called leveraged ETFs, right? These are, I don't know how technical your audience is, but I'll try to keep it relatively simple. These are like investment tools. You can buy it on your broker, like it would be a stock, and they're higher risk, and they're full of derivatives and contracts and handshakes and counterparties and acronyms and things that just scream risk. That at the time when I learned about this, we'd just gotten over the 2008 financial crisis. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, this is really screwed up. These things shouldn't exist, right? Like there's so many things wrong about this. And I remember writing this long blog post complaining about the system. And then I decided not to write the blog post, right? And instead channel that energy into Wall Street Bets and saying, if this is allowed, let's fix the system the other way around, right? Like, and I want to hear the people on CNBC say this is outrageous. I don't want just the individual to say it. And so ever since then, there's been this kind of philosophy with Wall Street Bets of, yes, let's make money, right? Although sometimes it's not even about making money, and it's more of an activist approach. We saw that GameStop and thereafter. But it's let's make money, but also let's find these inefficiencies that we can exploit, because we're a lot of people. And they've found, once again, GameStop was the famous example, but there's been a bunch of them that, as far as I'm concerned, were even more sophisticated prior to GameStop, and they'll continue to find them, right? And then the system gets stronger as a whole. I'll finish that by saying, if you think about, I was asked by a reporter from Reuters, say, do you think it's crazy that AMC is trying to sell more shares right now that the price has been boosted by Wall Street Bets? And they're just doing this offering. The CEO is saying these things aren't worth as much as you're paying for them, but buy them anyways. It's outrageous. And I said, the only thing that's outrageous is the question, because the system has gotten so far away from what it was meant to do that you forgot that's why the stocks exist, right? This guy is using the capital markets to raise capital to reinvest into his business, to create goods and services and R&D, whatever, and create jobs and make the world a better place. That's why this thing is here. Did you forget that, right? Like, but people did forget that, right? That's why the stock market is there. People go public on the stock market to pay back their investors, as early seed investors, not to raise capital, right? Oftentimes they're already fully funded. Like, then you have like SPACs or whatever, which is kind of the opposite thing, which is just, I don't know. So bringing back this world of finance into a productive contributor to society is one of the big side effects of Wall Street Bets.
Share with people in a nutshell what happened with GameStop, and I'm curious, how did it? I'm assuming, please correct me if I'm wrong here, that really propelled Wall Street Bets to sort of more mainstream awareness. How did that affect? Is that right? And how did that affect the whole narrative?
GameStop happened earlier this year, January or February, where you had a bunch of people, like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, buy up shares of GameStop. And on the other side of this trade were a bunch of hedge funds that were short selling this, meaning they were betting the price would go down. So because so many people bought this thing, the price just went up and up and up and up to astronomical levels, right? It was trading like $5 a year ago, and then it got up to like $500. And so a lot of these hedge funds had to close out their position. And then, of course, the media got wind of this, the mainstream media, rather, and shined a light on the fact that, hey, here's retail investors that are actually beating Wall Street at their own game, right? So that was like a feel-good narrative that people latched onto, and then that just further snowballed the effect. So that's the recap of it. It is slightly more technical as to how they pulled that off, because it was not just people buying; it was sophisticated. But as far as shining the light on Wall Street Bets was and had been in the news for several years prior, but it was like Bloomberg, right? Market Watch, CNBC, Wall Street Journal. Like, it was very specific. Now we're talking about this thing on CNN, Fox News, like international. So it exposed this community to non-finance news consumers. Also with regards to the growth of Wall Street Bets, the trends were already exponentially growing, right? Like, it was doubling and doubling and doubling every year. Certainly the trend was already pointing in that direction. And I'd say a combination between coronavirus that locked everyone at home, giving them something to avoid, to fill, and as well as the GameStop, I think also accelerated that growth.
What do you think about the amount of capital going into early stage companies right now in the last few years right now?
I mean, like private, you're talking about private capital?
Angel and VC, early, the seed and A round and the valuations around them.
I think that's great. Like, look, I don't really worry too much about the valuations or the tendencies, because just the economy is a very predictable cycle, and you can't predict the time. You can't time it, but it's going to happen, right? You'll have booms and busts, and that's kind of how it goes. And so wherever it is that we land on this cycle, the pendulum swings and goes right back towards the middle of it. I'm glad that there is a fair amount of investment that's taking place right now. There's a lot of innovations, a lot of for many years, I ignored crypto and blockchain stuff because I assumed it was just Bitcoin, right? Or like or some coin, and it has a thing, it's a price and supply and demand, and it was uninteresting. But I've now recently realized that I was wrong, and I made a mistake and not reevaluating that stance, because there's so many different things that we're on the precipice, right? That like we need that investment, we need those risk takers, and we need those investors to be able to push it forward too. And I mentioned blockchain related stuff is because I've starting to lean heavily, understanding that it is not a coin, right? It can also be a coin, but it is so much more than that.
It is so much more than that. But on the point of the coin, yesterday we talked with Alex Mashinsky. He's the founder of Celsius Network, which he doesn't call a bank, but for simplicity's sake, he stores your cryptocurrency, makes loans on that cryptocurrency, and pays users back in interest, which can range 2 to roughly, I think, even 15% or so yield, depending on the coin. He talks about that being a democratizing factor for the world, really, that in fact very wealthy people, instead of paying taxes, borrow against their own assets as a means of leveraging their wealth but not having to pay taxes. And I wonder how you think that plays into, do you believe that is the future of finance? You think that right now it feels like a pretty niche group? However, a year ago they had $1 billion in assets. Now they have 25 billion or 22 billion, and there's many competitors, BlockFi and lots of others. What do you think is the future of that space? And does Bitcoin or do cryptocurrencies become 50 years from now, say, a mass consumer utilized tool?
Well, first, I'll start by saying, like, I don't have an issue with the opposite of democratized finance, right? Like, this is going to be what we're calling institutions. We have central banks and fiat. Like, I understand all of the criticisms very well. Like, I studied, I have a very strong economics background. I get it, right? But if it wasn't for that central bank and for these regular banks, we wouldn't have crypto, period, right? Like that stuff is necessary for society to progress, to being able to leverage money out, things like that. That said, there have been inefficiencies with that system. So we hear about the complaining of the printing press and the inflation, or we hear about counterparty risk, what we saw 10 or so years ago. These kind of cracks in the system can be very painful when they're exposed. And I feel that the blockchain technology has the ability to improve that two ways. One, through innovative offerings, right? Like things like this loans that you're talking about, that have a completely different risk profile, right? When you borrow money or when you lend money, traditionally, like your risks are identified, right? As the counterparty and the macro and this and that, and you have certain types of controls in place to mitigate that risk. In blockchain, you also have it, and it's this decentralized kind of approach to it, right? Like you don't have a counterparty; you have like a million of them, and they're blockchains, like they're locked in smart contracts that you can't really manage. So identifying that risk in the blockchain is, I think, really interesting. So that's the first one, and the second one is it pressures regular Wall Street or regular institutions to get on the ball, right? Like to say, okay, well, clearly there's benefits to doing it on blockchain. Maybe we won't do it on blockchain, but maybe we'll offer our own decentralized whatever, and we'll try to mimic that because it is really useful to have whatever it might be. And let's start with 24-hour a day transactions or trading or whatever. Let's start with instant settlements. Like, why do I have to wait 3 days for my check to finally clear, right? Like that stuff is it's a risk, right? It's not just annoying for me, it's a risk for the system. There's no reason why you should have to wait. We saw in GameStop this thing happen with all the brokers, and Robin had to stop allowing it. All that stuff happened because there's rules from back when they used to take things on horseback across Manhattan with the certificates and whatever. It took 2 days. Now the computer's programmed such that saying you have to wait 2 days before you can deposit this money. There's a lot of down up pressure that can also help improve the system. And as that relates to people, the number of products that exist, like so above and beyond loan. It's like, yeah, here you have a loan. You understand how that works. Let's put it on the blockchain. Here's all the benefits. That's wonderful. I think that's great. But I'm thinking like 10 steps ahead of that, right? The other day we started working, I'm doing a lot of things there in the space, and started working these things called mirrored assets, which have really impressive technology. And basically you take a thing that has a number on it, and you basically turn that into a token, right? Anything that has a provable number associated with it. And then you have a token, and then this thing through smart contracts reflects whatever logic you put into it. So I thought, how cool would it be is if somebody owned a ski resort, wanted to hedge against lack of snow proportionally to how little snows that year, by short selling 60 inches of snow, right? So you tokenize this thing, 60 inches, you short sell it. If it snows 0, nobody showed up to your ski resort, but you made a lot of money from your short selling inches of snow. If snowed 60 inches, you didn't, you made money the way you're supposed to through people that came. Like this kind of sophisticated tool that already, like the technology is already there for it, and everything's already in place for it, all, provable and smart contract, whatever. That gives businesses an insane amount of flexibility that we can't even think of right now to stabilize their finances. Not just talk about profit. I'm talking about stabilizing these curves of cycles.
That's a fascinating example. Weather is an easy one to get my head around. Are there other, are you thinking about restaurants predicting how many people walk through the door and hedging against, swings in business? I mean, where else do you think that applies?
Yeah, I don't pretend to be smart enough. Like I became really humbled, with this one time when I got into this, into one of these crypto brokers. I hands-on learning. I saw this thing called the leveraged ETF or whatever for Bitcoin. I tried to buy it. It stopped me. It said, no, you can't, because you need to know you don't know what you're doing. These things are leveraged ETFs. And I'm like hell, I don't. Like I wrote about this thing 20 years ago. There's nothing you could possibly teach me about this, but fine, I'll watch your video. I watched the video, and sure enough, I learned something. Right? And these guys figured out, so leveraged ETFs have this kind of nasty side effect where they go to 0 with 100% certainty over time. And it's technical and it's math based, right? But these guys figured out a way around that. So if you buy a leveraged ETF on NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, it's going to go to 0 in the long term. But if you buy it on the blockchain, it might go to 0 in 500 or 1,000 years, but they fixed it. So I'm like, man, why didn't anybody think about that before? So that humbled me to the point where it says, I can't imagine what else somebody else is going to think up of. But yes, I mean, you can apply this thing to anything. If you can imagine, you can tokenize a number, right? Like back it by smart contracts so that you cannot tamper with this thing. And you put that out there for people to trade on both sides of this thing. That, I cannot, my imagination is just big enough to know that I'm not smart enough to know how many applications for these types of things exist.
We're going to run out of time with the amount of questions you've just triggered in me, but that's okay. Pastor VP Taylor has been coming to my events for a long time. He's I hope you don't mind. I hope he doesn't mind if I characterize him a bit as sort of interested in tech, but not necessarily a technology person. But he asked a question to us here and said, how can I use Wall Street Bets to teach and empower senior and young people in my urban community? He's a district leader in Irvington Township. And so, what would you say to somebody like that?
So I'll try to make it brief. I got a lot of thank yous when when GameStop happened from very well financed blue checkmark people on Twitter that said, dude, I've been trying to get my kids to learn about finance forever, and they think that what I do is boring, and they finally trading stocks. So thank you. There is a different philosophy and a different mindset with these generations. And let me now say that there's also a sustainable approach to finance, which is entirely different from what from previous generations think. And by that I mean you have Warren Buffett. Let's invest, let's diversify, let's do discounted cash flow analysis for fundamental whatever, and do a book value, fair value. Blah, blah, blah. You can do that stuff if you want with Excel, but it is just as feasible to go on there and say, because thanks to memes or thanks to jokes or whatever, saying, okay, everyone's talking about Tesla. I like the car or whatever, or this new one, the Lucid that's coming out that I actually think is really nice. Okay, I'm going to buy this stock and see what happens. And then they buy this stock, maybe because of a meme, maybe irresponsibly in the eyes of a parent. But now this person has a stock, and now they're like, why did the stock go down today? Right? Yesterday, all the stocks went down. I don't know what they're doing today. But that person's going to go online, going to say, why is stocks down? Oh, there's a thing about like bonds and the yields and the interest rate. And what does that have to do with anything? Why does my Lucid car have to do with this bond? And all of a sudden, this person's educated themselves, right? Because they're trying to cheer on their investment. That is a really cool way to get engaged. Like, so this hands-on, have fun with it. It's perfectly fine. This gamified thing that's being portrayed as negative is probably the most positive thing that's happened to finance in the world. Put confetti animation, give them rewards for trading, even if it's irresponsible, because nobody likes to lose money. So eventually people will rein themselves in, but in the process, they're going to learn. So that's my answer.
And I would add that in his district, in case you're not aware, but there are a lot of fractional share buying services that people can get in with very little bit of money just to get some money in the game and start getting into it. But you bring up a really interesting point.
A broker where you log in and you see 2% up. Doesn't matter if it's $1 or $100 or $1,000. It feels nice, right? Like,
and it starts to trigger that dopamine reaction and going, all right, I get this.
Yep.
There's a lot more I would like to ask you, and we'll hear more from you next week. But I really appreciate you joining us. I think it's fascinating what you've been up to. On that last point, you're talking about the humanized elements of trading. When you talk about like if a meme inspires a trade, so what? And I love the idea that we're getting to a place where culture and business are overlapping in a way where people are actually leveraging them for their own, in this case, financial benefit, but being much more upfront about how these things really happen.
Absolutely.
And so if it's to your point, right? If it's the flying confetti that gets somebody excited, that humanizes the whole exchange, which I think is kind of what's behind in some ways the Wall Street Bets movement. So I really appreciate you joining us today, making time for us, not just today, but also in a week at Propelify. Really looking forward to seeing you there. If you are watching, you haven't registered, come hear more amazing wisdom from Jaime and about 80 other fantastic speakers 1 week from today. Use the code Let's Propel 21 for a free ticket. I know we got at least one with Pastor coming. He's psyched to sign up and see you there. And we'll end again with the high five. Jaime, 1, 2, 3. Boom. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in a week.
Thank you.